regarding some of the topics that we have discussed of late. And most of them are regarding prayer. So we will start with some of them, inshallah ta'ala. The first question, if 2 rak'ah were missed in a 3 or 4 rak'ah prayer. So a person misses 2 rak'ah in Maghrib or Isha or Dhuhr or Asr. So any Salah that exceeds 3 rak'ah. A person needs to make up the missing rak'ah. In that case, in which order surah should be recited? Now this is a question that is twofold, and it hinges on a concept that is very important. I'll give you that concept, I'll give you that principle, and then we're going to base all answers that come after on that principle. One of the conditions of Salah for it to be considered valid is that it has to be made in order. The prayers need to be made in order, and the individual rak'ah of each prayer need to be made in order. Okay? So for instance, a person comes in to make Dhuhr and Asr, right? For whatever reason they missed Dhuhr, they had some valid excuse. Our situation is we have now Dhuhr and Asr. It's Asr time. And the Salah that's being made in the Jama'ah is Asr. What should that person do? The answer is that person enters behind the Imam, enters into prayer, but with the intention of Dhuhr, not Asr. Why? Because they have to make Dhuhr and Asr. And those prayers need to be made in order. If a person were to purposely, with the intention, make Asr before Dhuhr, they have to remake Asr again. Why? Because the prayers need to be made in order. Same thing, a person comes into the masjid, what's being made is Salatul Isha, and they need to make Maghrib still. Let's say they're traveling or what have you. They need to make Salatul Maghrib. What do? Should they enter into the prayer behind the Imam, but the Imam is making Isha? The answer is they join the Imam and they make 3 rak'ah with the intention of Salat al-Maghrib. When the Imam stands for the 4th rak'ah, they either remain seated and wait for the Imam to finish and make taslim with the Imam, or they conclude their prayer and depart from the Imam at the 3rd rak'ah. They finish their prayer, and then if they have time, they can join the Imam in his 4th rak'ah, but the follower's 1st rak'ah of Isha. Does that make sense? This is how the companions radiallahu anhum prayed, because the order of prayers has to be preserved. It has to be in that order, right? The same thing is applicable to the order of rak'at in a prayer. What does that mean? I join the prayer behind the Imam. The Imam is in his 3rd rak'ah. It's for me, my 1st rak'ah. So the Imam finishes, let's say, his 4th rak'ah. That for me is my 2nd rak'ah. Now when the Imam is finished, I stand up. I'm now making my 3rd rak'ah, which means I recite Surah Al-Fatiha and continue on. Right? And so on and so forth. Let's say I were to come into the masjid. It's my 1st rak'ah, the Imam's 4th. I make that with him. Now, of course, I don't have a tashahhud after my 1st rak'ah. I'm supposed to have a tashahhud after my 2nd, right? But the Imam has tashahhud. I sit with the Imam. Why? Because I'm following the Imam in that case. And that leads us to an interesting question. What salah, hypothetically, would a person need to make tashahhud in every single rak'ah? Maghrib. How? They come in, missing one rak'ah, right? They're going to sit for tashahhud, stand, sit for tashahhud, stand, sit for tashahhud. Why? Because following the imam is part of that process. And that goes even as far as making a shortened prayer behind an imam who is not shortening his prayer. And this happens a lot. It's a very common mistake. When I'm traveling, I need to make 2 rak'ah for dhuhr, 2 rak'ah for asr, right? I come in with the imam, he is making 4 because he's a resident, he's not traveling. So oftentimes people will make 2 rak'ah and then depart from the imam. Incorrect. The person, when he is making salah behind a mutim, meaning a resident, they completely pray the prayer that the imam prays. Even if they only catch the last rak'ah, even if they only catch tashahhud in the last rak'ah of the imam, being that they started with an imam who is mutim, praying the full prayer, they now have to pray the full prayer behind the imam. Does that make sense? Now you may say, well, hang on a second. What about when we just said maghrib, behind an imam making 4 rak'ah, you depart from the imam? We say yes, because adding another rak'ah knowingly to your 3 rak'ah prayer will invalidate it. Because maghrib is 3 rak'ah only. There's a difference between adding a rak'ah to a prayer that naturally does not have that and adding a completed prayer behind someone who is completing their prayer. So, the rak'at are made in order. And this is a common question because oftentimes people think that when you come into the prayer, if you're catching the imam's 3rd, that's your 3rd and 4th, and then you're making up 1 and 2. That's not correct. The answer is, you are always making them in order. Always. No matter what the situation, you are always making prayer in order. The prayers are in order, and the rak'at are in order. He says, for example, 3rd rak'ah should be Surah Al-Falaq, then 4th rak'ah Surah Al-Nas, or in reverse order, where 3rd rak'ah will have Surah Al-Nas and 4th will be Falaq. I think the question is clear with regards to recitation. And that also takes us to an interesting point, which is it obligatory to recite the Quran in the order of surahs that is in the Mus'haf, in Salah? That's the question. So for instance, the order of the Mus'haf is Surah Al-Falaq, Surah Al-Nas. Can I recite in the first rak'ah Surah Al-Nas and in the second rak'ah Surah Al-Falaq? The answer is, it is permissible, but it is unorthodox. It's permissible, but disliked. Why? Because the Mus'haf order is the order that the ijma' of the ummah rests upon, and the order of the surah has to do with the meanings of the chapters as well. But it's not necessarily incorrect. There are narrations where the Prophet ﷺ recited some chapters out of order. But those narrations all occurred before the final year of his life, ﷺ, and that is what we call al-ard al-akhira, the final rehearsal and revision of the order of the Quran with Jibreel in Ramadan that year. He reviewed it twice with Jibreel, and that order that was set is what we find in the Mus'haf today. So any order that was previous to that is abrogated. So for instance, in Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, there's a narration where Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu stood for salah with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he mentions that he recited Surah Al-Baqarah, then Surah Al-Nisa, then Surah Ali Imran, right? The chapter order is Baqarah, Ali Imran, and Nisa. But these are all what? In the early days, before Al-Ard Al-Akhira lil-Mus'haf. It's not something that will invalidate your prayer. It's not something that will decrease the reward of your prayer. But it is unprecedented in the Prophet's Sunnah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Another question for a witr prayer. If someone can't keep the recited surah in order, will it invalidate prayer? For example, first Surah Al-Falaq, then Surah Al-Nas, and then third rak'ah Surah Al-Ikhlas. Will prayer need correction, sajda? We just answered that. And that is the order of the chapters will not affect the validity of your prayer. And sujood as-sahw is not for that. Sujood as-sahw is for obligations and mistakes in pillars. Sujood as-sahw is not for anything beyond that. Now, there is a narration which mentions that the chapters that the Prophet ﷺ would recite in witr, when he would make 3 rak'ah altogether, are the last 3 chapters of the Quran. Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Falaq, Surah Al-Nas. A lot of people think that Surah Al-Ikhlas has to be the last chapter in witr. And the answer is no. The first chapter in the first rak'ah is Surah Al-Ikhlas. The second chapter in the second rak'ah is Surah Al-Falaq. The third chapter in the third rak'ah is Surah Al-Nas, which is the witr. That is how he prayed it, alayhi salatu wassalam. He says, regarding Surah Al-Fatiha in each rak'ah, if you join after the Surah Al-Fatiha, Ameen is recited. Do the joining person have to recite Fatiha when the Imam is reciting next surah? Because it was Surah Al-Fatiha must be recited, otherwise namaz is not valid. This is a good question. So the question here is, let's say I come into the masjid, the Imam is reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. He finishes Al-Fatiha, and he finishes at ta'meen with the people. And then he goes on to recite. But I missed that part of prayer. Do I now need to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for myself because I missed that part of prayer? The answer is no. Because as we mentioned before, the Imam's recitation is the ma'mum, the person praying with him, is a recitation for all those praying behind him. There's a narration in Sunan Abi Dawood. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-mu'adhdhinu mu'taman wal-imamu daman. He says, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that the mu'adhin is entrusted with the time. Meaning when we hear the mu'adhin make adhan, we don't have to double check. He is entrusted with the time. And the imam is a daman. What does daman mean? Meaning that he is a guarantee for anything missed by his followers. Okay? So let's say you make a mistake in your prayer. You miss something, or you misspeak, or what have you. The imam carries that burden, meaning that his salah patches up the salah of anyone behind him. He is a guarantee of the validity of the people praying with him. So there is no such thing, and this is a common mistake, there's no such thing where you, praying behind me, for instance, you would make sujood as-sahw. We finish prayer, I don't make sujood as-sahw, but you make sujood as-sahw for a mistake that you made in your prayer. The only time when you're praying behind an imam that you would make sujood as-sahw, we know what sujood as-sahw is, right? The sujood of forgetfulness. We'll have a talk on that as well. There are some rulings that go with that. Yarhamukallah. There are some rulings that go with that. But sujood as-sahw, the sujood of forgetfulness, this is the only time you praying behind an imam would make it, is if the imam made sujood as-sahw. Then you would follow him in that, right? Even if you made a mistake in a third or fourth rak'ah that you missed with the imam, you made it on your own, would you make sujood as-sahw? Difference of opinion amongst the scholars. Most correct, you would not make sujood as-sahw. Why? Because the imam is a daman. This is a general narration. The mu'adhin is entrusted and the imam is a guarantee, right? Now, the same thing is mentioned here with regards to missing Surah Al-Fatiha behind the imam. You would not recite Surah Al-Fatiha. If you enter into prayer while the imam is reciting, you just what? Listen. That's the general statement that the Prophet gave us. He said, وَإِذَا قَرَأَ فَأَنصِتُوا. If the Imam recites, then listen. That's it. That's the only thing you're supposed to be doing. And we have no instance where the Imam is reciting aloud for himself and everybody behind him is reciting something for themselves alone. Right? Nobody is hearing and nobody is reciting. Everybody is reciting and everybody is hearing simultaneously. We don't have a precedent for that anywhere else. Any questions on those rulings? If you have any questions, ask them as we go.
You said something theoretical about the Maghrib prayers.
Yeah.
That theoretically can do tashahhud every rak'ah. How can that be?
Making tashahhud in every rak'ah?
In Maghrib, this is what you said.
Yeah, I mean, if you come in the second, if I'm leading prayer and you walk in and you miss the first rak'ah and you join Salah, we're going to, my second rak'ah is your first. We're going to sit for tashahhud, right? Then I'm going to stand up. That's my third and your second. Then we're going to sit again for tashahhud, right? Now when I finish prayer, you're going to stand up and then you're going to make tashahhud again.
If you come on the third or fourth rak'ah and you miss the first and second,
yes.
So you want to make up the first and second that you missed. In this case, you actually say Al-Fatiha, another surah?
No, you're, like we said, you're making the rak'at in order. So when you join, let's say I'm leading Salah, you come in, you miss 2 rak'at, right? My third is your first. It's not your third. My fourth is your second. When you stand up, you're making third and fourth, which means you would only recite Surah Al-Fatiha. They're in order. The rak'at are always in order. The prayers are always in order. It's a common mistake, actually,
so, Imam,
that is made, yes.
Doing your third and fourth, and somebody missed the first 2 sets. Rak'ah, he's doing first and second. He won't have time to do after Surah Al-Fatiha any Quran recitation.
Yeah, that's okay because reciting anything beyond Surah Al-Fatiha is optional. If I were to lead you in Salah right now and only read Surah Al-Fatiha, our Salah would be valid. If I were to lead you in Salah and only recite Surah Al-Fatiha and not recite aloud, only recite to myself, which would be bizarre, right? And everybody would be worried, the Salah would still be valid because these are optional elements of prayer. Prayer has 9 conditions and it has 14 pillars. And it has 8 obligations. Anything beyond that is sunnah, is nafil. It will not affect your prayer at all, right? And that's how the scholars of Islam, this is why they discuss things like pillars and divide things into obligations and so forth, is not for us to follow, it's for us when we make a mistake. When you come to ask me and you say, I made such and such mistake in my prayer, what am I going to go through? I'm going to go through, was it a condition that you missed? No. Was it a pillar that you missed? No. Was it an obligation that you missed? No. Your prayer is valid, right? That's how it works. And that's the reason why the books of fiqh are structured in that way. Now, so this is also a question that was asked last week, and what's interesting about these sessions, I've been doing sessions like this for almost 20 years, and what's interesting about them is invariably, when we are done with the session, 2 or 3 people are going to stop me and say they have a question, right? It will always happen. Count on it, right? As you count on the sun rising in the east, it will always happen. But one of those questions, which I wish would have been asked aloud, is regarding ghusl. And this is a common misconception about ghusl that people make. In our culture, when I say our culture, meaning our time, our modern time, we have a nice warm shower, right? We don't have to go fetch water. We don't have to heat water up like, well, when I was a kid. We just jump in the shower, and make salah. See, the battery is out. We just jump in the shower and take a shower because it's easy. So part of our culture now is that we take a shower every day usually. Most people take a shower every morning when they wake up. Before they go to work, they jump in the shower. It's just a part of our routine. And so, again, half of knowledge is very dangerous, right? And that is that many of us have heard that ghusl takes the place of wudu. And so many people count that shower that they take in the morning takes the place of wudu. So many people will take a shower, not make wudu, and then go about their day, praying as if they have wudu or wiping over their socks or whatever it is that they're doing throughout their day. And this is very incorrect. The only time ghusl will take the place of wudu is when ghusl is for that which ghusl is obligated. So janaba, menstruation, which I don't think applies to anyone here right now, or postpartum bleeding, after childbirth and nifas, right? These are the only three instances where taking a shower is going to take the place of wudu. Why is that? The scholars have divided al-hadath. Al-hadath is a state of spiritual impurity that prevents you from making salah. That is referred to as what? Hadath. It's divided into two categories. There is major hadath and minor hadath. Major hadath means you will never be impure to pray until you make a ghusl, until you bathe. Minor hadath is what wudu is for. So minor hadath is for those 6 things that break your wudu, right? Those 6 things that break your wudu, you can make wudu. However, major hadath is being in a state of janaba, so sexual impurity, after sexual climax with excretion. This now is referred to as janaba, whether it be male or female. Number 2 is after the conclusion of a menstrual cycle. Number 3, after the conclusion of a nifas, which is the postpartum bleeding, or 40 days after childbirth. These are the 3 instances where a person must bathe. No, they can't make wudu for that. They have to bathe, right? And what is bathing? The least case, or the lowest level of acceptance of bathing is intention, and that pure water rinse the entirety of the body from head to toe, including the mouth and nose. This is what is referred to as al-ghusl. That's bare minimum. The best bathing is how the Prophet ﷺ bathed. Isha narrates that he would start with his hands, and he would say Bismillah, start with Bismillah. He would wash his hands 3 times, then his private parts front and then back, and then he would make wudu as wudu for prayer, except for his feet. And sometimes he would do his feet too. Then he would pour the water on his head 3 times and work it into the roots of his hair. Then he would bathe the right side of his body, then the left side of his body, and then his feet. That is how the Prophet ﷺ bathed. And if a person bathes like that, they made wudu while they were bathing. But If I were, let's say a person is in a state of janaba, sexual impurity. They wake up, they want to bathe. The least case scenario, they take the water into their mouth, into their nose as we would in wudu, and then they dump the water on all of their body. It touched all of the skin on their body with the intention of bathing. That is ghusl. I have ghusl. I don't have to make wudu now. But that is only if I am in a state of janaba, or if a woman is in a state of major hadath, because what removes major hadath will remove minor hadath, not the other way around. Is that clear? So when I just wake up, because my morning routine is I take a shower, but I'm not in a state of janaba, and I just take a nice shower and get out, I don't have wudu. I don't have wudu until I make wudu. And that's one of the interesting points about Islam. You're not required to do more than what you're commanded, because doing more will never take the place of what you were commanded. This goes back to a principle we've mentioned before in our sessions after Isha, and that is, adherence is superior to sacrifice. What does that mean? Allah said that I need to wipe over my head in wudu. I am so pious that I'm going to wash my head instead, because wiping just is not enough for me. All of the scholars agree your wudu would never be valid if you just washed your head. You're supposed to wipe your head, that's it. Not wash, it is to be wiped. That extra is not accepted. It invalidates your worship. Salat al-Dhuhr is 4 rak'ah. I want to make it 6 because I'm just feeling myself today. I'm feeling froggy and I need to make 6. Your salah would be invalid according to the consensus of all of the scholars of Islam. Because 4 is all you are commanded and 4 is all you are allowed. Is all you are allowed. Because worship is based on Allah allowing you to worship Him. Right? So this mistake is so common. When I lived in the Caribbean, you know, we'd go to the beach often, we would swim, you know, everywhere is a beach, so you'd go swim often. Made ghusl, and this takes the place of wudu. That could never ever take the place of wudu. Only time that would take the place of wudu is if they were in a state of janaba. And when a person, you know, we don't have that now, but in the Prophet's time, men had long hair and they kept their hair braided. They always kept their head covered and they kept their hair braided. The Prophet ﷺ, his hair was usually to his shoulders, but it was always braided, always. And he would always have 3 or 4 braids, and then he would wrap his turban over his braids. Those braids for women and men do not have to come out when you make ghusl for janaba. They only have to come out for women after their menstrual cycle or after their postpartum having a child. But for janaba, that's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed, because if you had to take out your braids every time you bathe, you'd just be sitting around all day braiding your hair and taking your braids out and braiding your hair and taking your braids out. It would be way too cumbersome. So that is an allowance that Allah has given us. Any other questions on ghusl or salah or anything like that? Yes?
During the shower, there are 2 scenarios. One, that if we do the wudu during the shower, is that okay? One. And second,
Yeah.
if your intention is that shower has everything in it which the wudu will do, the feet, the head, the nose, the mouth, and the hand. But then the second scenario, you're not doing extra wudu, you're just putting water on all parts.
But that's 2 good questions. Number 1, you mentioned if you take that shower in the way and you make wudu during that shower, will that suffice as wudu? And the answer is yes, if you have intention for it. But the second scenario you mentioned, that hey, I'm washing every part of my body that needs to be washed during wudu plus some. So why wouldn't it take its place? Who can answer that question?
It does not follow the order.
It doesn't follow the order of wudu. The order of wudu is integral to the wudu. I'll give you this little point here. It has never been authentically narrated that the Prophet ﷺ ever made wudu out of the order that is mentioned in Surah Al-Ma'idah. Never. It never happened, right? Wudu was always made in order. And that's one of the reasons that the verse of wudu is structured the way it is. If you look in Surah Al-Ma'idah, the verse of wudu, verse number 6, you see that if you stand for Salah, then wash your faces and then your arms, including the elbows, wipe over your heads and wash your feet. That is not what would be expected in speaking. In the way of speaking, we would usually put all the things that are similar together and all the things that are dissimilar together, correct? So the order would naturally be, wash your faces, wash your hands, including the elbows, wash your feet, and wipe over your head. But he stuck wiping in the middle of things that are washed. And the only clear reason for that is that the order of wudu is integral to the validity of wudu. If you make wudu out of order, your wudu cannot be valid that way. You understand? So when I stand and I make that ghusl in the morning, yeah, I'm washing all the places that I would naturally wash for wudu, but I'm doing it out of order. So it could not be considered wudu. Yes?
So if I do the wudu and then do the optional shower.
Yeah, that's fine. You can make wudu before, you can make wudu after, right? Or if you're in a state of janaba, you could just shower. You don't even have to make wudu. It would take the place of wudu. But wudu has to be made at some point with the intention of wudu, in order. And when I say in order, I'm speaking about face, hands, head, feet. I'm not speaking about right and left. Right and left doesn't affect the order of wudu.
Postpartum, can she take a shower in between the 40 days?
Yeah, of course. It just wouldn't be an obligatory ghusl that would allow her to make salah. Of course, she would shower in 40 days. Good Lord.
And while we have the topic, the feet washing or feet wiping?
The feet, according to the consensus of Islamic scholarship, is washing, including the ankles. Now, the issue of wiping over the feet, this is a very obscure narration mentioned by Ibn Abbas. That Ibn Abbas said you can wipe over your feet. That narration is incredibly obscure, and it is what is referred to as mahjur. The scholarship of Islam later agreed that feet must be washed unless you have some footwear on. If you have on some footwear, then it has its certain rulings. You can wipe over the feet. And that's why there are two recitations of that verse. One recitation means, and wash your feet, including the ankles. And the other recitation means, and wipe your feet, including the ankles. And that part of wipe your feet means if you have some footwear on. And we'll do a thing on that because it's a whole can of worms. Once we open that, we're gonna be here all night.
Wiping the head is after washing the arms, right?
Wiping the head? Yes, and the ears. And the ears are part of the head. Yes. You had a question?
If a ghusl is sunnah, like ghusl al-Jum'ah, does it suffice for wudu?
Right, this is a question that the scholars have debated. And honestly, if you make that ghusl the way that the Prophet did, then yes. If not, if your ghusl does not involve wudu, then you are to make wudu. Why? Because that ghusl does not remove a hadath. Like for instance, if I were to come to Jum'ah without making ghusl, only made wudu, would my Jum'ah salah be valid? What's the answer? Yeah, it would be valid. Therefore, ghusl is not integral to Jum'ah salah. It's obligatory, but it is separate from Jum'ah salah. Therefore, it cannot take the place of wudu. Understood? Clear? Yeah.
So the sequence of right and hand and the left hand in wudu is not important.
It's important because it's the sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ would always start with the right. However, it's not integral to validity of wudu. Meaning if you mix up that order, it will not affect your wudu being valid. Now, yes?
So when making wudu, making it with socks, does it have to be leather socks or?
See, there's the can of worms. So we will discuss this next week, inshallah. Issue of leather socks and mish leather socks is a whole thing, right? And our Desi brothers, Pakistan, India, they're going to skewer me after that. So I'd like to live for one more week, and then after that we'll discuss it, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa jazakumullahu khair.